Oh, I was on mute. Okay, the recording has started now, so we can go ahead and get started. If you've joined in and want to add yourself to the attendees list here, feel free, or someone else can grab that. But let's get started on our milestones and such. Since the last community meeting, the 1.1 release went out. So there is a blog post that has been published that kind of goes into some of the details about the 1.1 release. Definitely really happy and of like the community effort behind that and some of the features and advancements that went in there from full set of contributors in the community. That was the first release I think we did on our the 8-week release cycle. So we'll be doing that same sort of release cycle and cadence for the next release. So I think we're working towards 1.2 now. And so I think, Dan, you added in here the tentative scheduled release date, which would be towards the end of April. Is there anything else to add on that, Dan, or is this the link good? Okay, cool. Sounds good. So yeah, there's a helpful link here too around the upcoming schedule for releases, which you can find right here on the main README page. And then I believe it's three releases at a time or is it four? I can't remember. I'm sorry. Will be maintained, which are eligible for patches and fixes going back to them to continue servicing them. But the schedule will be continued to be updated here on the main README page. All right, so we're working towards the end of April. We have the high-level roadmap was defined for 1.2 with some of the high-level areas here. I think so. Something I'm gonna want to do here is in this meeting is be focusing kind of on the project board. And so I would like us to be able to do what we can to keep this up to date in terms of what are the the areas that we have accepted into the milestone, the areas where we want to be making investments, and things that are open and in progress and closed too. So keeping the project board for upcoming releases up to date will be a really good public community way to see everything that's going on, what's planned, what we're actually doing, and what is the status of all of those as well too.
Jared, can I butt in for a second? Because I was just writing something about this exact topic for a future.
Please do.
Bullet point. That was part of the motivation for those of us who work at Upbound for moving the meeting around. There were other reasons as well, but if we move this meeting to a Thursday, that puts it really close to when we do our team planning, and we've fallen into a bad habit of planning planning open source stuff in our private meetings, and we don't want to do that. We want to get it back out into the open. So part of that was hygiene for us. One thing that might be good to do maybe at the next meeting would be to discuss as a community a little bit how we want to manage these boards, because I don't think it was ever really something that there was a public conversation about how we wanted to sort of get things on the Crossplane board. One example is that we put things like design documents on that board that aren't really tied to a particular release at the moment, that just represent that people are working on them. We have we don't have boards for each provider for releases for them, for example. So a lot of provider features go on this board, even though we're not necessarily shipping providers when we ship a release. So it may make sense to do a session to figure out what exactly we want to do with this board and how the community can get involved. Because one thing that we want to keep on top of there is we need a process to discuss what goes into a release, what goes in the proposed column and how things get accepted and things like that. So not sure if myself or someone else should potentially put together a proposal for how this might work to inform the next meeting, but something that I think would be good to have the community weigh in on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we've had some discussion too about what is the best process or what is a process for proposing changes and proposing new features to be accepted. So I think that we'll want to continue following up on that and get that defined and have that. Like I think a key thing there is the accessibility of it. to make sure that the process is easy to find, well known, easy to follow, enough to be able to have new ideas and things that would benefit the project as a whole and the community of adopters around it, to be able to get things in that to them, and go through the process too that make sure it's the right thing for the project and for the community too. So we started a bit of an effort on that to kind of define that, and we should continue following up on that.
Well, did we start that publicly, Jared, at some point?
I don't know if I can't remember where. Dan, was there something that you had opened up to kind of document some of that process around for proposed changes?
There isn't any issues or anything like that, but I'm going to talk a bit in a few minutes about the adding new member stuff in the org repo and where we might.
Oh yeah, that's maybe a good spot for that too.
I'm feeling optimistic because I have a rare, very meeting-free day today, so I'm adding myself an action item to write up a small proposal for how we might do this, just as a straw man to start a discussion next time.
Awesome, that sounds great then. Yeah, because I know we had a desire for that, but getting some traction and getting that kind of written down so we can iterate on it sounds fantastic. So we're kind of early in 1.2. Do we want to? I don't want to go over every single issue in this board here, but some of the high level aspects here. These all move off. Is you smiling there now? Are you? It looks like you got a lot on your plate there. Move off.
Yeah, lots of them are like the ones in progress. I think all of them are reviewing other people's PRs. The one-pager pluggable webhooks, that is a design doc in progress, and the PR open are open PRs. And the bugs are there, and I haven't had time to look into them. So
yeah, so I think that then this board, we need to put a as a 1.2 planning process, we need to kind of get this board up to date so that the areas that we want to be committing to or including this release get put into the columns here, and then we can start tracking them as we go through the release cycle.
Yeah, I think one detail is that unless we choose to add a new forum for doing that, or find a way to do it async, that this meeting is going to be the place where we're going to do that. There are no other dedicated forums at the moment to grooming this board.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool. So what are the high level areas that we're that are part of the roadmap here, like the pluggable webhook support? Like we well, if you have the design going for that already and starting to get some feedback and everything on that, right?
I haven't opened the PR yet. It's in draft.
Okay, got it. Yeah, and then the enhanced back off cross core controllers, that's already being rolled out and implemented, right?
That's actually corresponding to core Crossplane, and we just implemented that in 1.1 for the providers. So this is a pretty easy change, though, that I anticipate I'll get into 1.2.
Nice. Okay. And then move off. Do you want to provide a little? There's a whole theme around some of the code AWS ACK code generation stuff. Do you want to provide a quick update on that general area?
Yeah, sure. We have a few PRs that are opened by the community, and I'm reviewing them and help people getting them merged. And there are also a couple PRs in the ACK repo that I opened. For example, the reference and selector fields latent function is up to date. So these are generating more of the parts that we today write manually. I think one of those PRs got a review from Jay from ACK team. So I will get back to that. But yeah, the general theme is that we're continuing to add new resources with code generation, and we are enhancing the code generation pipeline itself with more parts being generated automatically.
Nice, Rafik. I think that's fantastic. Yep. And then also, I think a big update that's coming up soon is the vSphere provider as well too. That should be releasing hopefully within the next couple weeks here. So that'll be part of at least the 1.2 timeframe, not tied to it, but part of the 1.2 timeframe. Cool. And then also integration testing is an area that is getting specific efforts on now as well too. I think that Rahul is on the call as well too. We was going to introduce Rahul later on here, but it's a good time now, I think, too. So for integration testing, the Linux Foundation's mentorship program, we got a lot of applications to work on some Crossplane projects through that mentorship program. And Rahul Grover was accepted into the program here, and he's already started on getting ramped up, and he's going to be making investments to improve and expand the coverage of our integration testing, which is definitely an area that will be really, really beneficial to everyone by giving us some, more confidence about our, quality from commit to commit, ability to upgrade, all sorts of scenarios that'll be really, really helpful. So Rahul, thank you very much for, applying and getting involved in the community and, joining the call today. We're definitely looking forward to all the things that you're going to be able to be creating.
Yeah, pleasure's all mine. Hi, everyone.
Rahul, do you want to give a quick update about some of the stuff you had been focusing on so far, like towards the provider upgrade testing stuff? Just a quick summary of that.
Sure thing. So since I was new to a bit Golang stuff, so first of all, in provider upgrading testing, I moved on to looking into GitHub Actions. So I had explored all this stuff, and we discussed in the last meeting as well, that update regarding the GitHub Actions. And now I have moving on to looking into the GitHub tests, how we can write like the Go test specifically for the upgrade testing part. So probably by tomorrow, if I get a chance, I will talk to Dan once and get things ready.
Awesome. Yeah, really, really happy to have you here, Rahul, and really excited to see what you're making over the next couple months. Awesome. Any other comments on the 1.2 efforts that are kind of getting underway here? We've got some more work to do to kind of get ramped up and get the milestone more crisply defined. But any other comments on the early efforts here for 1.2?
There are a few, I think 2 PRs I opened to fix some bugs in composition, but we might have a patch release for them. So I'm not sure if they go into like the 1.2 specifically.
Got it. Are they on the board already to move off?
I think one of them is already merged and one PR is open, but they should be. I think they're in the like done code.
Okay, awesome, perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Cool. Then I think we could move on to the community topics section here. So Nick, you kind of already addressed the the desire to move the meeting to a Thursday time. I think that will be good for general planning purposes and getting the efforts more organized, I think. And so as Nick stated there, I think that we'll want to make a more concerted effort to use this time to be planning and scheduling or figuring out work items, et cetera, within this meeting. It's kind of been a bit of a the community. We figure things out and we're kind of just talking about status of this meeting, but I think getting more people involved, having it be a more transparent, community-driven visibility process there, I think will be a really good effort. So I'm glad that we'll be doing that. Would the first one be next Thursday then? Is that the right timing?
Yeah, that seems about right, because that would be by next Thursday. You mean not this week, but the next week, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, like 10 days from now, 11.
Yeah, so that's a slightly shorter period between meetings than usual, but that seems like the best cadence to me.
Awesome. Is there much left on this, Nick, to merge this PR? Has it already been merged?
No, it was mostly just I wanted to have one more meeting at this time period, and so just in case people were, I don't know, coming to this meeting and not looking at pull requests or something like that and announcements, they would be aware that we're going to change the date. So I think we can pretty much merge it now and then update the calendar and whatnot.
Cool. Sounds perfect. All right. Dan, any updates on some of the cool live streams and stuff you've been doing recently? I know you've been doing more cluster API live streams.
Yeah, so we haven't had a TBS show in a little bit, and some of that is we are going to get that set up alternate with the new community meeting. So like as y'all were saying, next Thursday should be our first community meeting, and we want to do TBS on the alternate weeks from that. And so 2 weeks from this Thursday will probably be our next TBS episode. And right now, the tentative plan is to do one on Flux. Folks are familiar with that. It's just a CNCF project, kind of similar to like Argo CD for GitOps kind of workflows that just went to incubation in the CNCF. So we kind of want to celebrate that with them. So that's the tentative plan for that. Before that, I imagine we'll have a few more cluster API live streams as we're moving towards doing a community upstream cluster API community demo of some of the work that we've been showing there. But those will most likely be impromptu as the past ones have been.
Awesome. Yeah, I think all those episodes are super awesome, Dan. So thanks for the work you've been doing on those. I was just looking for, I was trying to grab a link from some of the more recent ones. I found it now. I think that's the latest one, the part 4. It's got some extra timestamps and stuff on it too. Okay, cool. And so we already introduced and welcomed Rahul from the LFX mentorship program. So thanks again, Rahul, for joining us. I'm really happy to have you. Another update then on the incubation proposal. So we got the responses that we needed, and for some production adopters, always taking more. Anyone who's successfully using the Crossplane project in production scenarios, or even not, just still evaluating is fine too. The more information about that, and the more kind of awareness of adopters to the project, the better. But that the proposal should be updated. Should be submitted very, very soon. I think the kind of putting it together is the final touches and polish on it, and should be updated or submitted very, very soon. So excited to get that in there. Okay. And then the community event, planning for that is ongoing. That will be a 0-day event at KubeCon, Cloud Native Con, I suppose too, which is the often forgotten second event title for that thing. So May 4th is when the community day is being held. We got a good number of proposals submitted for it, and the selection committee is reviewing those now, I think. I thought I was on the selection committee, but I don't think I actually am, because I think they've been meeting and reviewing things, and I haven't been invited to any of those. Do you guys have an update on the selection status?
I went through, I think as of yesterday, only, unless folks have done it since, only Marcin and I have voted on everything. But it's due tomorrow morning, I think, Pacific Standard Time. We had 34 submissions, and overall, I would say they were all very good. We had to, the steering committee, not the steering committee, sorry, the review committee ranks them from, I guess, 0 to 5. And so far, I haven't seen anything that hasn't been on the high end of that scale. So I think it's going to be tough to filter them down if we do in fact need to. So very, very high quality submissions so far.
Do we know when the acceptance notifications go out? What the timeline for that is?
I don't know off the top of my head. I can have a look at my email. Dan, do you know off the top of your head?
I don't think so, but it should be, I think, the beginning of next week. it might be that early. It's either the beginning of next week or the following week, I thought. So, but yeah, definitely double check on that.
Awesome.
Thursday, March 16th. So this Thursday, I guess, is when speaker notifications will be sent out, and the schedule will go live next Monday.
Thursday, March 18th. This week?
16th this week.
16th is tomorrow.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's a typo. Yeah, sorry. I presume
Thursday.
It does say Thursday, March 16th, but it also says Tuesday, March 16th. So I'm guessing it's just a copy paste error. So Thursday this week is my guess. That's the one Thursday that falls between us making a final decision tomorrow and the schedule going live on Monday.
Got it. Thursday, March 18th. It is then. Awesome. 34 submissions is quite impressive as well too. I didn't know my submission had so much competition. So we'll see how that goes then. I won't be offended if I'm not selected.
I only gave out a very small handful of 5 out of 5s, and 2 of 3 of those were talks by one particular community member who shall remain unnamed.
Ooh, nice. Perhaps they are on this call. All right, cool. And then Mr. Dan, you have you want to kind of walk us through some of the work you've done around the new member onboarding from recently?
Yep. So this document is very short, but describes how an individual in the community can request membership to the Crossplane org. So typically, we've kind of just done this in an ad hoc manual way, where we're trying to assign an issue to someone, and we realize we can't because they're not in the org. So then we add them, and we really wanted to formalize the process around this because number one, we'd end up adding people who weren't really interested in contributing long term, and number two, there's lots of folks who have made major contributions who are not part of the organization, and both from a logistical standpoint of requesting reviews and assigning issues, it's nice to have them in the org, and also from a recognition perspective, it's definitely good to do that. So this describes how you can go about adding yourself to the org. There's actually an issue template that also has all the steps you need to do. They're very minimal. You do need to request sponsorship privately from 2 folks that are already in the Crossplane org. And once you open this issue, they will sponsor you. So a good example of, there's a closed issue now of Rahul actually became the first member to go through this process. And Rahul was sponsored by Jared and I, since we're 2 of the mentors for the LFX program alongside Muvafik. And so Rahul went through this, and you'll see there's also a PR that closed this. And the PR actually adds a manifest to the repo, adds to the manifest in the repo with an entry of a GitHub org membership Kubernetes object. So the idea here, and we have a live stream where we go through kind of working on some of this, and we'll probably have another one soon. The idea here is we have a Crossplane cluster running, and we set up some automation here that when a PR is merged that modifies this manifest, we essentially queue control apply it to the cluster. Provider GitHub running there sees that, and the controller for a membership is set up to check if a member is already part of the Crossplane org. And if not, create an invitation, and when they accept it, it'll make sure they're there. And so in this case, since we don't have that set up quite yet, Jared went ahead and added Rahul to the org. But in the future, it'll all be managed via pull requests. And in general, some of this automation and using Crossplane to actually manage our org is something we want to move towards. So you could imagine some of the things like if we're doing enhancement proposals or pulling issues, into a certain milestone, those could all be managed through a PR and approval process. And the nice thing here, for instance, is adding a new member to the org is something that requires a steering committee approval. So when I opened this PR, it required Jared, Nick, or Bassam to come in and approve it and merge it. So we have all of those different policies that are stated in our governance codified, which is really nice. And we have a traceable history of all these things happening. So there's lots of different areas we could continue to improve this, and it's cool to use Crossplane to dog food that effort. So if you're kind of newer to the community and interested in getting involved with some of that, definitely reach out, and we have plenty of work to do there.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things. I mean, besides like having a nice process to join the organization in GitHub and be a member of it, I think it's so cool that it's being managed by Crossplane itself, right? This is an instance of like Crossplane being a controller and extending the Kubernetes control plane to manage some resources outside of the control plane. So I think that's really cool to be like declaratively adding a new member and then having that be reconciled with the GitHub API to add the member to the organization. So that's a really creative idea to use Crossplane to be managing some other entity out in the world there. So kudos to Dan for getting that going. Yep. So that is in the Crossplane org repo. So the org repo underneath Crossplane there has the issue template and the process for becoming a new member. If anyone is interested who is not already a member on this call, and most people probably are though. Okay. All right. So that was all the community topics here. I don't see specific PRs in to discuss here in this section. So before we move on to the optional time at the end here, we're going to kind of dive into some more technical details, maybe kind of circle around on some of those for a bit. I wanted to open the floor for anybody else who has a general topic or a topic applicable to all attendees here that they want to bring up before we go into the optional time. Okay. Cool. Well, let's do that then. Let's go proceed into the optional time here. So anybody who wants to break off and adjourn from the meeting here and not stick around for these deeper technical conversations is more than welcome to take off now. The recording will still continue. So if you want to catch it later on, then you're more than welcome. But other than that, Dan, do you want to bring up your issues one by one?
Sure. So the first one here is one that we discussed at the last community meeting, but the RFC has been baking for some time now, and I think there's been pretty positive feedback across the board to go ahead and get this done. So the proposal here is based on the GCP API structure. We want to follow the same path that Terraform has done with their providers and some other folks that consume the GCP API have, and have separate providers for their stable APIs and for their beta APIs. And essentially, you can look at the proposals here, but essentially we would never move the APIs and provider GCP beta to V1 because there's not a guarantee of stability, which is an issue that we're seeing right now where different resources that we have in provider GCP have breaking changes in them because they rely on beta APIs. And so an update will break at them, but we can't update other resources or add new ones because we're maintaining this, older version of the SDK to support these fields. So we'd like to have two separate providers, and the main provider GCP will only use their V1 stable APIs. So this will involve both creating the new provider and having some breaking changes to provider GCP beta or provider GCP for the next release. They're not huge breaking changes, but they do reduce some of the functionality. So we definitely want to communicate this well. The one thing that's kind of been up for debate is the name of the API groups. It looks like now Nick and potentially Moveoffic said as well. To use beta as the leading indicator in the group name. I think that's probably fine. I kind of lean towards having the provider name GCP beta in there just because it's more in line with other providers, but I'm kind of indifferent. But I guess this is the technical discussion time, so if folks want to weigh in on that, that's cool.
I think my main concern is not the right word. The main thing that comes to mind for me around this whole thing is just the this seems like it will be a breaking API change, and it's pretty rare for us to make breaking API changes to things that we've marked beta. So just communicating it and having some kind of documented path, maybe to go from folks who have like I guess what is effectively a beta GKE cluster at the moment in the regular GCP provider, to like have a way for them to like move those over to the beta one once that exists. I also, as a side note, another thing, it might be worth, if we haven't already, doing a little bit of research into like what would go into the beta provider, because as far as I can tell, maybe I'm wrong, but I was looking at the Cloud SQL API the other day, and I thought that Cloud SQL only has a beta API. Just Googling this now to try and, because that seems unlikely, because I'm pretty sure like Terraform makes this split, for example, and they,
Yeah, I'm fairly certain that right now in provider GCP, the only beta API we depend on is GKE, which is nice because it reduces the churn in this change. But let me verify here.
yeah. Or just as a, yeah, I wonder how that works. I can only see V1 Beta 4 under the Cloud SQL Admin API.
Oh yeah, it does look like we're using V1 Beta 4. So that would be an interesting one. But I mean, I presume if it's still beta, we'd put it in the GCP beta one, but that would theoretically involve dropping it from this one, which feels like a pretty large breaking change if we're totally dropping it and there's nothing to replace it with.
It seems kind of strange that also, just from a, I don't know if we have any GCP experts or staff on the call, but Cloud SQL seems like a pretty core part of the Google API. I'm kind of surprised that they don't have a stable API for it.
Yeah, I do see that the Terraform GCP provider appears to support Cloud SQL. So yeah, I'm not sure what the policy is there. Could just be that that's just like a weird intricacy of Google and it's known to be stable, but yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, so is there any sort of, if no one has any qualms, can we just proceed with this? What are the next steps?
I think the next steps are probably first setting up. Well, it sounds like that we want to, when we make the breaking change, we want to have the alternative ready, which would make sense. So I think the next steps are setting up the provider GCP beta repo, getting it bootstrapped, getting some of the current types that are beta right now, which would be GKE and potentially, the Cloud SQL, depending on what we deem there. And then once that's ready, potentially running a release of that sooner, and then making the necessary updates in provider GCP with the breaking changes.
So it seems like maybe it's worth doing this by just forking the provider GCP repo and then tearing out all the bits that aren't beta. But
yeah, that could be a way to go. We could also just, instead of like literally forking on GitHub, you can also just push the origin somewhere else, which I don't know if it might just show up kind of weird if it's forked in the GitHub UI, but it doesn't really matter. Also, I don't know if we can fork it from the, well, it had a different name, so yeah, whatever. We can figure that out. Cool. I think we can go to the next one probably. All right. This one, let me pull it up. This one is one I opened on Friday and asked for some feedback, and lots of folks gave it. So definitely appreciate that. I did feel like there was maybe a bit of confusion about what exactly would be exposed here. And there are also a couple of different design decisions that I was hoping to talk through. So I think that Nick's response here about putting this on the let's see, on the external connector. Instead is definitely a good way to go. I think being able to configure it at both the provider and provider config level is good. And when I say provider, I mean like as a flag to the entry point of the binary. I and that can be configured with the controller config. I know there was some talk like from Steve about putting in something like a cron schedule for that. That would be pretty like complex logic, and you couldn't necessarily enforce it that much. So the idea there, I guess, would be like you get a predictable kind of number of hits on the API that you deem with like the cron schedule. But in reality, what this value is being talked about being used for is that in the happy path for each resource, how often we requeue. And so based on when that resource was created and that sort of thing, the cron schedule doesn't make quite as much sense there. And so I think the primary use case would be in the happy path when you have like a ton of resources or something like that. Or you have something that's not super critical to be synced frequently. Or if it's just kind of like a kind of static metadata resource, like something like IAM or something like that. You may just want it to like sync once a day. And so I think just having that requeue after value exposed, or what we're calling the poll interval right now, exposed, and then still using the back off that we implemented for the error path would be pretty good. One other thing I wanted to mention, I know Muvafik and I had some discussions about whether this should be exposed on the provider object or on the controller config. I'm pretty staunchly in the controller config camp, I'd say, because putting it on the provider would bring like deployment / container configuration to a resource where we currently have a separation of concern of those types of things. Plus, we don't guarantee that every provider is going to support this functionality or this flag. So from that perspective, I'd say controller config, but definitely want to hear Muvafix and other folks' thoughts on that.
Before we, sorry, Mubaf, I don't mean to cut you off. But before we dive in on that, where does this flag go? I want to make the comment that I think for a lot of folks, especially folks who like haven't written a provider or deep dived into provider source code, this might be a little bit opaque, and there's sort of one part of that I think means that once we do start exposing this setting somewhere, I think we'll need fairly thorough documentation around how it works, because as you alluded to before, Dan, it's not sadly as simple as set this flag and Crossplane will only hit your API every n seconds. It's very much Crossplane will hit your API per resource, per managed resource. It will hit your API every n seconds, or whatever you set this poll interval to. And even then, it's only in the happy path. If it starts hitting an error, then it takes its sort of exponential back off settings and uses those as well. So I think it would be a very, very nice property to be able to give some kind of guarantees around, this Crossplane provider will never hit your API more than this frequently, but it's very difficult to do with how controller runtime works. It's my little spiel. Now we can move on to technical details.
Yeah, for the field, I think that we're on the same page with putting it to provider config, right?
Yeah. I think exposing on the provider config is good.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of like indifferent between like for the default flag being in provider and controller config, so I'd be okay with default config as well.
Yeah. I'm very hesitant because any sort of like customization of the deployment, or any aspect of the deployment is like a fairly highly sensitive operation. I mean, installing a provider is as well, but you're basically saying this person has privileges to go outside of the same defaults that Crossplane sets for you. So yeah, I want to preserve that separation of concern, and we, even though it would be a standard flag, we could say like if you say, if we have like a value on the provider or a poll interval on the provider object, that would be passed through to the controller in the form of a flag or an environment variable or something like that. So you theoretically could, like someone could have a provider where providing that flag meant, steal
Yeah.
all my data or something. Like it's not like a really uniform thing. So yeah, that's why I lean towards controller config.
Yeah, I think I don't really like think about the flag or it is being a flag or some other mechanism to pass in the config, but for more from user's perspective, like if it's something that every provider has, which is the case, I guess, every provider hits an API and it's it hits them with a frequency because they use the reconciler, so it could go to provider. But yeah,
If you say provider, do you mean like the provider package object or the provider config?
provider package. We're talking about the default, not I think we're all on the same page with provider config, but what to use when the field in provider config isn't supplied. So that's kind of either provider package or a controller config. So I'm kind of slightly preferring provider because that feature is basically has to be implemented by all providers. So it's kind of common thing.
Yeah, I think I fall with it could be because I'm too deep in the details here, but I fall with Dan at the moment. The controller config is the type that we use to configure provider controllers. I don't think provider has any configuration of a provider on it at the moment. It's dedicated to configuring how the provider is installed, the package. Subtle distinction. I do generally with things like this, like if I was king of the world, I'd probably start with just a flag and see how that went, and then see if people needed it to be a provider config too. I saw that when we polled people here, there was kind of a mix of everything. I think some people said they wanted it at the per resource level. Some people would be fine with it just being global. Some people wanted it at the provider config level. It seems like the provider config level is kind of the happy medium here. I could be very personally easily convinced that if we start exposing a way to override this at the provider config level, that we don't even need to expose a flag at the provider level to set it as well, to be honest. Yeah. I wonder how many provider configs typically get used in the wild, and if it would really be that onerous to just say the default is some say default, and if you want something different, put it in your provider config.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I mean, we essentially set the default right now with the manage reconciler. And you have to use a provider config always to contact the API. So, you're going to have to create one anyway. So setting it there versus setting it on the controller config, it seems like the provider config is a good place for it. I also like it because MoveOffic pointed this out. Lots of these APIs, if you it's per account rate limiting. So the provider config where you're actually performing authentication and stuff, while those could be the same account, it kind of makes sense to have isolation at that level. So I really like that model.
Yeah, so I think my suggestion would be personally, honestly, to do the smallest change possible to start with, and then gather feedback on that. So it sounds like that might be to just put it on the provider config and not worry about making it configurable at the provider level. And it seems like probably the first step to this would be making whatever changes we need to make to the external client or the external connector API for this. I kind of want to. I think it was a fail on my part to not have the external connector return a struct in the first place, because returning a struct makes it easy for us to add more stuff that gets returned without making breaking API changes. So I kind of want to make that cut regardless, with this being a good time to introduce that change. But that is a fairly impactful breaking change to Crossplane runtime. I'm not that worried about it because Crossplane runtime, you update to a new version, but it doesn't require every single controller, all of the code gen, all of that kind of stuff to go and update to this new pattern. I believe though, if we were to say that all external clients need to add a new interface that they support or a new method on their interface, it would be the same problem. So yeah, I'd probably start by rolling out this external client, external connector change and getting folks on that. Because obviously some people could just choose they don't want to, as we were saying before, we can't really control or mandate that people support certain things on their provider configs. It's mostly just a sort of a convention.
Cool. Sounds good to me.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, hopefully my contextual browsing on the doc site in the background was helpful for the conversation. All right.
That
Cool.
reminded me.
Yeah, Harsh, how's it going?
Yeah, it's going good. Yeah. So, in the previous issue for the provider GCP, there's an issue that if someone installs both the providers, the beta and the version one, that if they try to kubectl explain a resource, then kubectl will pick it for you instead of us having the control over the API group. So that could be misleading, but you hovering over docs.cid.dev reminded me that that won't be an issue for Crossplane users, I guess, because Crossplane users would just go to the website rather than kubectl explain.
Yeah, I noticed you pointed that out, which it is unfortunate that that's the behavior of kubectl, but yeah, I'd say in this context, it's annoying, but not like something to make a design decision on here.
Yeah.
Is this and is this fix going into 1.21? Or
Yeah, I
I'm
think
actually
the
not
issue
sure.
is open. Like the discussion is going on. It's not like they mentioned about the issue here, but the issue is still on.
oh, okay. What
Yeah.
got merged?
It's an initiative for the whole thing, but the issue is still valid.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Cool. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Harsh.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. So those are the two items we had here for deeper technical discussions. Anything else then before we wrap up? All right. Then we can go ahead and adjourn, and we will make the change to move this meeting to the next Thursday slot, 10-ish days from now. That will be the next time that we meet, and then we'll obviously we'll be on Slack and everything until then. So thanks, everybody.